Welcome to the North State Breakdown with Benjamin Nguyen. Today, I'd like to discuss some of President Donald Trump's most controversial executive orders and how they led to the February 17, 2025 protest in Shasta County. Similar protests are happening all over the country, organized by the 50501 movement, which stands for 50 protests, 50 states, 1 day. In Shasta County, a similar protest organized locally drew a little over 400 people gathered to protest a range of Trump's policies, from his dismantling of DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, to the Make America Healthy Again initiative and proposed budget cuts from Elon Musk. The concerning issue with the Make America Healthy Again initiative is that it makes questionable assertions about rising rates of attention deficit disorder and autism. The policy implies these conditions are overdiagnosed rather than recognizing advancements in the diagnostic tools. Critics argue that proposed solutions rely on pseudoscience and could restrict access to necessary healthcare services for neurodivergent individuals. Beyond that, the order suggests changes to federal healthcare funding that could reduce resources for special education programs and Medicaid, which would disproportionately impact lower-income families. Another major concern is the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. This executive action grants a private entity headed by Elon Musk the authority to analyze public funds and recommend budget cuts based on proprietary metrics. The lack of transparency surrounding these metrics raises fears that essential social services could be slashed in the name of efficiency, without considering the real-life consequences for working-class Americans. Locally, there are also fears that this could mean a significant cut for funding for public lands. If these cuts are enacted, it could negatively impact tourism, conservation efforts, and local economies reliant on recreational visitors. Further exacerbating concerns is another executive order that was referenced recently in a Politico report that expands presidential power over independent federal agencies, undermining their ability to operate free from political influence. Many see this as a direct attack on checks and balances that prevent executive overreach. Protesters voiced their frustrations on how such actions threaten the long-standing independence of the regulatory agencies that oversee key aspects of everyday life, from environmental protections to consumer rights. The protest was also fueled by worries about proposed changes to Social Security. As reported by Forbes, new plans proposed by the administration could dramatically alter benefits, with suggestions that eligibility ages be raised and payouts be recalculated in ways that could reduce assistance for many retirees. This would be especially devastating for lower-income seniors who rely heavily on Social Security as their primary income. The DEI rollback weakens protections against workplace discrimination and reduces opportunities for marginalized groups, reversing progress made under past administrations. It also raises concern about economic disparities. The elimination of these programs removes safeguards meant to ensure equal access to education, jobs, and federal contracts, leading many to fear systemic discrimination will become normalized once again. Adding to financial concerns, a new bill introduced by the House of Representatives seeks to increase overdraft fees on bank customers. This legislation could place an additional financial burden on working-class Americans by making it more expensive for people to access their own money. Protesters pointed to policies like this as further evidence that economic decisions are increasingly favoring corporations over everyday citizens. These executive orders and legislative efforts present significant challenges to the constitutional principles, such as equal protection under the law and government accountability, while also carrying substantial economic risks. Beyond their immediate implications, they challenge fundamental constitutional principles such as equal protection under the law and government accountability to the people. They also produce economic risks, such as eliminating DEI programs and potential funding cuts to healthcare and education, which could increase unemployment, widen wealth gaps, and weaken the safety net for vulnerable communities. Looking back, the events of January 6, 2021 marked an unprecedented movement in modern American history, as a violent insurrection sought to overturn the results of a democratic election. It was characterized by the breaching of security barriers, direct attacks on the Capitol, and threats to lawmakers. Now, in contrast, the protest in Shasta County, while also driven by political frustrations, was a lawful expression of dissent. Protesters followed legal guidelines and focused on advocacy rather than force, demonstrating how civil resistance can be conducted within the bounds of democracy. The responses to these events also highlighted disparities in the public perception and law enforcement reactions. J6 resulted in hundreds of arrests and ongoing criminal investigations, while the February 17th protest remained peaceful, with no reported arrests or acts of violence. However, the tension in the air suggested that any spark could have led to an escalation. While the protest was largely peaceful, tensions did run high when counter-protesters arrived, waving large American flags. They engaged in heated discussions with demonstrators, leading to concerns that violence may erupt. The presence of counter-protesters demonstrated the deep divisions within the country, but also the importance of protecting free speech for all parties involved. Some counter-protesters attempted to engage in civil discourse, but others appeared intent on provoking an emotional response, making accusatory statements about the protesters being misinformed or brainwashed. As the main protest wound down and people began to disperse, counter-protesters became more willing to engage in conversations rather than simply provoking. Now, this shift highlights how, despite their differences, dialogue remains possible when the intensity of the moment subsides. Some counter-protesters admitted that they disagreed with the protesters' viewpoints, but they respected their right to express them. Others engaged in one-on-one discussions about specific policies, demonstrating that in the absence of crowd dynamics, a more productive exchange of ideas can occur. Shasta County has around 180,000 residents, with 111,000 registered voters. However, a small vocal minority often drives the political narrative. The overwhelming noise from both sides may discourage voter participation, reinforcing the perception that politics is nothing more than a spectacle. But civic engagement is crucial. The direction of policy should not be determined by the most vocal groups alone. If more citizens participate in these discussions and exercise their right to vote, the balance of power might shift in a way that better reflects the true will of the community. Notably, a significant portion of the crowd consisted of younger individuals, marking a new wave of civic involvement. This younger generation is taking an active role in shaping political discourse, signaling potential long-term involvement in local and national activism. Since I began reporting in 2021, I have noted that local politics are increasingly influenced by national discourse, distracting from substantive governance issues. However, we should be paying attention to the decisions being made at the federal level, which will directly impact the funding and resources available to local governments. For example, defunding healthcare initiatives could reduce state funding for critical services in Shasta County, forcing local leaders to find alternative solutions or risk leaving vulnerable residents without support. Protests will likely continue to be heated as much of the country has extremely strong feelings about policy. If you attend one of these protests and feel someone is purposefully trying to potentially incite an act of violence, do not engage. Pull out a camera and document the situation. It's the most powerful tool you have. Do not let someone else take control of your passion. Passion is important, but it needs to be focused. Don't let your opposition control you. Ultimately, this protest was a signal that Shasta County is experiencing a shift in political engagement. It is vital that the residents remain vigilant, advocate for respectful discourse, and push for meaningful participation in governance. Civic participation, whether through protests, discussions, or voting, is the only way to ensure that policies reflect the diverse perspectives of the community. And that's the breakdown.